Hi, this is Craig Lane with Health Alchemy video blog week 6. We're going to talk about hair mineral analysis, minerals in general, and acid-alkaline function. Since we're continuing the theme of the season of the kidney, we're still in winter time, and it's the season of the water element, which in many native traditions has to do with the dream or birth or birthing. And in the ancient traditions of the Chinese medical profession that I have a lot of experience in, we talk about the kidney, the bladder, the adrenal being the organs that manage the water element. And there's a larger picture at play here, because in the Oriental traditions they don't see the organs themselves, nor are they necessarily even treated in the strict acupuncture tradition in some schools. I'm a man of myself trying to bring together the worlds and stepping outside of rigid ideology and finding things that work. So one of the assessment tests I use is hair tissue mineral analysis, or hair mineral analysis. So you pull some of the hair off the back and you cut a little bit and you send it into a lab, and Analytical Research Labs happens to be one of my favorite in that they don't wash the hair, and so you would need to tell them if you color it or anything, but really they take the hair and then they analyze the mineral elements in there. And over the last 30 or 40 years they've worked out a pretty good system to see like how these minerals affect health, for example. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about acid and alkaline minerals, because there are acid elements in our bodies such as phosphorus, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, that all generate acid in the body. So what the body does in natural metabolic functions, when the cells are producing acid waste, for example, then the body uses alkaline buffers. So water is one of the alkaline buffers, and that water carries things away. So when you have a cell floating in some water, then when it spits out its contents, it's going to be carried off and drained out, hopefully. So you want this very delicate balance of pH, or acid alkaline, to be protected. And our main alkaline minerals are sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And the body has other mineral elements that it uses also, but for our purposes here today we'll just stick with the simplicity of this. So what they've discovered through VA hair mineral analysis is that you can get ratios of various minerals, such as the calcium to magnesium ratio tells us how well the cell is using insulin or processing blood sugar, how well the cell's mitochondria is generating energy, is one way of looking at that, because everything in the body needs to use glucose ultimately for energy, and some parts of the body can use ketones or fats for energy. But ultimately there's something being burned at the caloric level, and it's fuel. Doesn't matter what we call it. We label things and get stuck on labels here in the West, but ultimately it doesn't matter what we call stuff unless we're trying to discover the source of an imbalance. So in the combustion or digestion or metabolic processes, acid wastes are produced. And so what we see often in the body when there's too much acid, then there might be a hyper breath rate. And so when these mineral ratios are off, or if the body shows, say you've got this cell and they've discovered the ideal amount of calcium coming out in the hair, the ideal amount of magnesium coming out in the hair, the ideal amount of sodium and potassium and phosphorus, all coming out in the hair. So when there's too much or too little of it, then we know that the cell itself on a micro level is a mirror of what's happening on a macro level. So we've actually been able to, Dr. Larry Wilson's a great example of this. He's someone that's been doing this for so long, probably 25 or 30 years. He can see people's personality patterns, and Dr. Eck, who developed the system at Analytical Research Labs, they got pretty good at saying, looking at someone's numbers on the lab and saying, oh, you're probably an anxious type, or you're probably really stuck. And what's exciting about this assessment tool is that you get a marker, a base mark of like how much mercury is being excreted via the hair. And so if you have mercury amalgams in your mouth, mercury fillings, and you show low levels of mercury in your hair, well, guess what? Your body's holding on to mercury because that stuff is gassing off. And I don't care what your dentist says, I don't care what anybody in any rigid ideology says, you got mercury in your mouth, a drop of mercury could poison a whole lake. So it's gassing off, and it's gassing off where? In here. And then it's got to be carried off by the cell and out the body, and sometimes the body will sacrifice parts of itself to get these toxic metals out. And Natasha Campbell McBride feels that via the GAPS, or gut and psychology syndrome system, she feels that the gut flora sacrifices itself. The mercury gets into these cells and then they get pooped out eventually. So you need to have a continual turnover of healthy cells in the gut and gut flora. So what's exciting about hair tissue mineral analysis is that if you do one, it just tells you, like any test, whether it's a blood test, urine test, saliva test, hair tissue mineral test, it's only telling us a snapshot in time. So if you've got a guy running a race and you take a snapshot, you're only getting a snapshot in time, right, of what's happening, and then the process continues. So what's exciting about a hair tissue mineral analysis is you can get one at a baseline level, do a detoxification, a cleanse, a protocol with diet, supplements, herbs, whatever, and then do another test 3 or 4 months later, and you can see what has changed, and it'll give you a sense of if your therapy is working or not, because there's these 6 basic ratios, and we're looking at how blood sugar is affected by or being used by the cell, how thyroid hormone or the base metabolic rate being processed at the cellular level, how adrenal function, or the ability to motivate and step on the gas pedal, so to speak, deep reserves of vitality, how those are affected, how the sex hormones and cardiovascular system is working, and how digestion and assimilation is working, and whether protein's being retained by the body or whether the body's being torn down, anabolism versus catabolism. So what we're ultimately looking at here is it's a good starter test because it tells us, gee, we were excreting X amount of mercury or lead or cadmium, i.e. one of the heavy metals, and then the next test might show, gee, it jumped way up. It may not be a cause for panic, because if you had low levels of excreted mercury, then down the road it might jump up because your actually level of detoxification has sped up, and that's a good sign. In myself, I had a level of lead jump up, and I realized that after researching what lead is, that it was stored in my bones. And then as my detoxification and circulation and my body's ability to bind and chelate got better, and as I kept adding in healthy forms of calcium, healthy forms of minerals from more raw protein and more raw foods, again, I'm not a raw foodist, so let's not pigeonhole anybody here. I'd rather say that when minerals are not taken in their correct form, i.e. pasteurized milk versus raw milk is a good example. The calcium in pasteurized milk is basically unavailable to the body. You take a calcium carbonate supplement, you're basically eating rocks, and humans don't digest rocks very well. Humans need minerals in the form of either plant or animal matter that's been bound and assimilated properly by that, and then ideally eaten in a raw form. But there are times we need to eat cooked food to stay warm, and for cooking is a form of pre-digesting food in some way, but what you lose is you lose the enzymes, and that's what a lot of things, what vitamins and minerals are they're enzyme fractions. Like a vitamin is nothing more than ultimately a living complex that is so complex that, you know, we like to say that ascorbic acid is vitamin C, but we're actually only looking at part of the whole complex. It's like taking apart a watch and putting the facing back on and saying that's the watch. The watch is no longer a working mechanism when you take it apart and put it back together incorrectly and say just the parts we see are the parts that are actually the living complex. So it's very incorrect to say that ascorbic acid is vitamin C, just as it's very incorrect to say alpha-tocopherol or tocotrienols or whatever are vitamin E. They're part of the entire living complex that are in plants and animals. So this hair mineral analysis gives us a brief peek, if you will, into the cell of the body. And what's exciting about this is, since I'm leading a kidney cleanse and we're finishing it up in a few days, is that it's a good assessment tool that one could take before and after, say, a diet change of 3 to 4 months, and then retake the tool again and see, gee, I'm actually my alkaline minerals, i.e. calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, all went up on my hair tissue mineral analysis, which means my body is actually becoming a bit more alkaline. There are other tests to verify this, and so when one is trying to do assessment, it's often best to have at least 3 measures. So we might measure your saliva and urine pH for a number of days. We might take a hair tissue mineral analysis. We might do a blood test. We might check with doing a lemon juice test where you drink down a bit of lemon juice and swish it around your mouth, and then take some pH readings a few minutes later and see how the saliva responds to an acid, i.e. the citric acid in lemon juice. So there's lots of great means for assessment. This is one that we'll be talking about in the course of the year. We've got many, many more blogs in this year, and I look forward to speaking to you in week 7 video blog. This is Craig Lane signing off with Health Alchemy Hair Tissue Mineral Analysis, a great assessment tool, and it's not very expensive at all. Have a great day.